Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are now moving to the session 2. And today's session 2 will be started with a topic on probiotics, which is a very known topic to everybody. But still, there is lots of things to discuss on this. And we have our speaker, Dr. Bhaskar Raju, who is really an expert on this topic. Dr. Bhaskar Raju is one of the pioneer pediatric gastroenterologists in India, and he was the former professor and head of the Department of Pediatric Gastroenterology in the Institute of Child Health and HC in Chennai. Today, he is a practicing pediatric gastroenterologist in Chennai. So, without further losing any time, we just hand over to Dr. Bhaskar Raju to talk on probiotics.
Hi everybody. Today the topic of discussion by me is probiotics. Not just probiotics, what is new in probiotics, which means a lot of traditional stuff which you are already familiar with. I will not be troubling you about, but I will just touch upon them at the beginning of my presentation. 2014 was a watershed year for probiotics. That's when Espegan finally released his position paper on the use of probiotics for acute gastroenteritis, which elevated probiotics from a glorified mumbo jumbo to a very recognized technical modality of treatment, at least for acute gastroenteritis. 6 years down the line, the same group, Hania Shayuska, published the update on the same use of probiotics in acute gastroenteritis. There are slight differences between 2014 and 2020, which I will touch upon in one of the subsequent slides. During the 6 years, plenty of things happened in probiotics. There came this article by Haiva Hojsek, also from Europe, Zagreb, Croatia, authored by several leading pediatric gastroenterologists from Italy, Romania, Turkey, Germany, France, almost like an European guideline. But the difference here is it not only looked at acute gastroenteritis, but also looked at several other indications for probiotics and made specific recommendations. Then there was one more paper, Pediatric Antibiotic Associated Diarrhea Review by Cochrane. This also added a lot of new information, just came about a year ago, which I will include in the summary of whatever I am presenting now. Then there is that, finally, probiotics and prebiotics, a treatise by World Gastroenterology Organization, which all of you are very familiar. It's an umbrella organization which includes gastroenterology associations all over the world. This is basically adult recommendation, but it had almost 20 pages of probiotics in pediatric use as well. Summarizing all these 4 major papers, what do I have? Acute watery diarrhea is the best indication for probiotics so far in pediatric practice, and 2 probiotics have been strongly recommended, Lactobacillus GG and Saccharomyces boulardii. The 2020 update of Espegan guidelines also includes 2 additional probiotics. I'll touch upon that in the next slide, but this is the best indication. The next best indication would be in antibiotic-associated diarrhea, where all these KOLs recommend only 2, Lactobacillus GG or Saccharomyces boulardii. Nosocomial infections, yes, certain extent it is useful, but basically LGG alone has been studied extensively. Rest of them, the data is not adequate to make a recommendation. Daycare-associated infections, a lot of studies looked into the easy way of avoiding daycare infections, especially the age group between 1 and 3 and 4 years, but the data up to now not really recommendatory of use on a regular basis, just may be useful. Then we have the last indication, functional gastrointestinal disorders. When it comes to infant colic, Lactobacillus reuteri has fair amount of decent data suggesting that it might be useful, at least in breastfed babies, perhaps not so useful in formula fed. There's not enough data there. As far as functional chronic abdominal pain in older children are concerned, Lactobacillus reuteri and LGG have been used, but the data again is dicey, not very recommendatory. 2020 guidelines goes beyond saying Saccharomyces boulardii and rhamnosus in the descending order. It also includes Lactobacillus reuteri DSM 17938 and Lactobacillus rhamnosus, another strain 19070 in the descending order as recommendations for use in acute gastroenteritis. It in fact goes one step further and says don't use Lactobacillus helveticus or another strain of Lactobacillus rhamnosus, which is R0011, and even gives a weak recommendation against Bacillus clausii. Surprising, because Bacillus clausii is an extremely popular probiotic used all over India and in many parts of Europe, especially Italy, but then Espegan does not recommend its use. In fact, specifically says don't use it. This would kind of tell you what you already know about it, and this is where I'm not going to spend much time on. I'm going to what are the new informations which have come. Most importantly, in respiratory infections. Very, very valid now during era of COVID. A lot of new data has come out on the possible use of probiotics, not only in respiratory infections, also COVID infections. I'll touch upon them. The whole respiratory infection probiotic conundrum came into fore about 5 years ago when this Cochrane review was published. This included a lot of articles on adult use of probiotics from the month of October all the way up to March, which in the northern hemisphere is the typical viral infection period, and also a few pediatric articles as well, randomized control trials. During 6 months of this period, probiotics were used and the incidence of upper respiratory infections were monitored. But not bad at all. You can see during that 6-month period, the number of people who had at least one URTA was 30 without probiotics, 19 with probiotics. Number of people who saved themselves antibiotic prescription down from 20 to 9. In fact, the duration of URTAs came down from 5 to 7. So, on the whole, a good report on probiotics and respiratory infections. The pediatric component of it was subsequently published as a systematic review just about a few months ago by the group from Turkey, which looked at all the papers which used probiotics. There is plenty of data there which I cannot show you in these slides, but I'll show you the recommendation they made. The recommendation they make is this review showed that probiotics have an impact on decreasing the incidence of URTIs and definitely can be used because they are extremely safe. This is a paper I thought I will include more out of interest because this is a paper which comes from the center of corona in this world, Wuhan in China. They seriously looked at use of probiotics in preventing ventilator-associated pneumonias. It included adults, quite a few adolescents, and a few children, not many children. But it included not only papers from China, papers from Europe and South America as well. And what was their result? Quite sanguine actually. They said there are some probiotics which are likely to be useful for prevention of ventilator-associated pneumonia. They specifically mentioned Bifidobacter brevi, Lactobacillus casei, and Bacillus subtilis and Enterobacter fecalis as likely useful candidates, information which we may use in our own pediatric intensive care. This is an article which was published a couple of years ago from Argentina. This actually looked at the use of probiotics and priming the nasal mucosa, preventing it from getting infection by other viral infections. Surprisingly good results. They primed rats with Lactobacillus rhamnosus, intranasally administered, and then exposed them to the influenza virus. Look here, the control group has significant pulmonary damage, while the probiotic group seems to have escaped it. The reason I mentioned it is, this was the impetus for a lot of people to seriously look at intranasal administration. Not only of probiotics, but also of antiviral drugs during this corona epidemic. Thomas Higgins, he is from Kentucky, USA. He has done a review article, state-of-the-art review, where he looked at almost 30 to 40 different randomized control trials where they are given intranasal administration of antivirals, intranasal administration of probiotics, and intranasal administration of combination of antibiotics, antivirals, and probiotics. And they say, yes, in fact, this again contains a lot of data. I'm just mentioning to you the last line in their conclusion. That line says, intranasal administration of antivirals do reduce the severity of lung involvement in COVID-19. Definitely can be tried for probiotics also, another method of administration. Now, you can ask me, okay, fine, gut infections, probiotics, you're giving it orally, they act in the intestine, but how do they help in respiratory infections? There's a treatise from Canada. This is an author, I can't pronounce his name, so I'm not calling his name out. This is almost a 20-30 page article on how probiotics actually enhance immunity. I'm just presenting one cartoon from that particular article, which details almost 12 to 13 different mechanisms by which probiotics apparently improve immunity and hence help in viral infections. I'm just mentioning 3 or 4 of them: antimicrobial production, prevention of adhesion, mucin generation, secretory IgA, development of generation of IgG, conversion of CD8 to cytotoxic lymphocytes, and variety of others. And hence, and the other takeaway from this article, which is very interesting, is that it actually says each probiotic has its own way of acting on immunity so that immunity improves. So not all probiotics act through a same common mechanism. Each one apparently has its own way of acting. There's an interesting article which I read about 2 years ago, but didn't think there was much there to it. This is an article which looked at two cohorts of newborns. One cohort brought up by parents who are highly hygiene-centric. They were extensively using chemical-based, alcohol-based antiseptics in their house to prevent infection in their newborns. And the other group used what they call as eco-friendly sanitization, which is soap and synthetic detergents. And they seriously looked at the development of microbiota in these newborns all the way up to 1 year of age. And surprisingly, perhaps not so surprisingly, there was a significant difference. You can see here, I mean, you may or may not be able to read this slide. I'll summarize it in the next slide for you, where almost 6 to 7 different probiotics, or rather microbiota, they are actually much less in the group which use chemical and alcohol-based sanitization, which is very, very vitally important now. An average patient, the newborn, their family who comes to my clinic invariably uses chemical-based or alcohol-based sanitization about 8 to 10 times a day. Here we are looking at only twice a day. And I'm sure in the days to come, we are going to see the impact of changed microbiota in these children. Generation C is a name many of you would have heard repeatedly being mentioned. It's a name which is used for describing the modern millennials, people who are born from 2080 and above. But they are called Generation C basically because they are connected consumers. They're supposed to be creative, curative. I mean, curation meaning that they are very organized in their life and they are constantly in communication. But when I say Generation C, I'm not referring to these groups of people, but I'm referring to these babies. Generation C babies were born in the COVID era. They're all born with a handicap. What handicap are they born with? They're brought up in a highly sanitized environment, lack of exposure to environmental germs, cocoon, non-exposure to people except parents, increased screen time, no exposure to routine infections, lack of stimulatory play. The question is, are they all likely to lead on to increased atopy and allergy, increased autoimmune diseases, increased obesity? I'm fairly certain it will. I've already shown you data that use of high levels of sanitization does impact the development of microbiota. That study not only includes formula fed, it also includes some exclusively breastfed babies. So breastfeeding alone is not likely to save these children. So the million-dollar question is, in these children, will long-term probiotics help in prevent this complication? I was searching the literature for studies which looked at long-term probiotics, especially in the COVID era, and I was surprised to find many studies are ongoing, but very few have actually been published. But the people who are involved in it are really top people, like Sarah Lebir. She is the past president of Microbiological Society of India. She is from University of Antwerp. Dr. Gregor Reid is the founder, president of the World Probiotic Society. He is from Canada. These papers are still, I'm quite certain by the end of the year they'll be out, but one paper is already out which has looked at long-term administration of probiotics, the perinatal, natal, postnatal period, all the way up to 1 year of age, and apparently it is beneficial. You can see here, this is the paper I was referring to. They have used it for almost starting from the 3rd trimester of pregnancy, all the way through lactation, all the way up to 1 year of age, almost about 60 to 70 randomized control trials they have looked at. And what did they find? The summary of their findings, that dysbiosis can definitely be prevented by using long-term probiotics. May be very relevant for us today. In fact, I am seriously tempted to use it in all the newborns I see during this period, especially to see to it that their gut microbiota stay normal and are not affected by this hyper-sanitized environment. Prevention of atopy to some extent useful. Prevention of food allergy too. Asthma, wheeze and rhinitis, dicey. They specifically recommend LGG, Lactobacillus reuteri, and a few Bifidobacter species. What else is new? Can probiotics flatten the curve? There is almost about 60 to 70 randomized control trials which have used probiotics all through the corona period for almost up to 6 months and looked at, did these adults and several adolescents and a few children as well, did they develop corona? And if they did they go in for complications? And they even looked at what probiotic is likely to be most useful. They picked up only those probiotics which are at least 2 well done peer-reviewed RCTs published, and they looked at Lactobacillus GG. You can see the list of Lactobacilli bifidobacter groups which are likely to be useful. This, of course, is preliminary information. I don't know whether we really should be using these, but I personally would feel much more confident using some probiotic in our newborns in the first 6 months of life during this period. I'm sure it's bound to help well, or at least reduction in morbidity. What else is new in probiotics? New names. Come January 1st, 2021, many of the familiar lactobacilli will get new names. This is, I mentioned about Dr. Sarah Levy from Belgium. She has published this article. The Microbiological Society actually found the genus Lactobacillus hugely heterogeneous. They found evolutionary-wise, DNA-wise, lot of genuses that have no business to be there are being called Lactobacillus. So they have recommended several changes in the names. I'm just mentioning about half a dozen of them in the next slide. You can see here, Lactobacillus casei from January 1st will become Lacticaceae bacillus. Paracaceae will become Lacticaceae bacillus paracaceae. Plantarum will become Lactiplanti. Lactobacillus brevis will become Levilactu. Salivarius will become Legilactu. Lactobacillus fermentum will become Limosilactu. I mean, as pediatricians, I don't think we will ever be able to remember these names. The commercial preparations are very likely to maintain the old names. But if you are planning to do research in probiotics, you are planning to publish any papers, you may need to get familiar with these new names, which are likely to come in. Now, what else is new? Probiotics in preterm infants. Nearly 15 years ago, the group from Australia, especially from Melbourne, Dr. Deshpande and his colleagues published a series of articles where they actually recommended a change in protocol for management of preterm infants. They said every preterm infant should be given prebiotics to prevent ABC. But there were groups in Europe and in US who were not in agreement with that, and we still have a lot of, at least till this paper was published, a lot of controversy on should you use prebiotics and probiotics in preterm infants or should you not. This European guideline clearly answers that question. The line in that specifically says, provided all safety issues are met, there is currently a conditional recommendation to provide either Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG or a combination of Bifidobacter and Lactis Streptococcus thermophilus. I'll just summarize this again here. It specifically says these are the two combinations. One combination, the other Lactobacillus GG. They need to be used in this particular dosage and they need to be used from the day of birth all the way up to 45 days. Definitely they will improve the incidence of necrotizing enterocolitis. The answer is finally here. There is no more controversy. Summarizing what I've told you so far the last 15 minutes, probiotics can prevent and reduce the severity of URI, LRTI, and ventilator-associated pneumonias. Antiviral effects of probiotics are very well elucidated. They are specific for each probiotic. Sanitized corona environment impacts baby's microflora apparently, and probiotics are likely to be useful in the long-term use, and they can prevent dysbiosis. Specific probiotics decrease the incidence of NEC in preterms. Long-term use of probiotics, perinatal, infantile, perhaps into early childhood, has definitely some benefits. Thank you. Hi. At about 4:50 hours today, that is 4:50, there is likely to be a quiz program in which the participants will be quizzed on whatever they have heard yesterday and today. Dr. Mathai, my friend and president of Vispagan, has promised a Mercedes-Benz car for the winner. No, just kidding. But anyway, don't miss that. It will be extremely interesting. This is just to announce that there is a quiz program at 4:50 hours today.